While most night fighters of the Second World War were often just basic conversions of existing aircraft, many would go on to receive significant modifications that transformed them into new highly specialized interceptors. Few of these proved to be as successful as the Junkers Ju-88G, a night fighter that combined the Luftwaffe's best detection systems with one of its most versatile airframes. 1943 was a year of highs and lows for the Luftwaffe's night fighter force, one that saw their tactics change considerably to match those of RAF's bomber command. While at their peak in spring, Luftwaffe defenses were shattered late summer during a devastating RAF raid on Hamburg. It was then that Bomber Command deployed radar reflecting chaff, which left night fighters and radar directors blind. In the following weeks, the Luftwaffe began a crash course which saw them adopt new night fighter radar systems and tactics. These reforms saw a transition from barrier defense tactics to a flexible pursuit strategy, and new radar systems were produced. These improvements would soon show their worth. German air defenses would prove formidable, and after several major raids in the fall and winter of 1943, Bomber Command suffered unsustainable losses. However, while most Luftwaffe planners were enthusiastic about their recent success, they would have to confront a growing concern in the service. They were reliant on considerably dated night fighter designs. Throughout much of 1943, the night fighting missions were taken up mostly by variants of the Bf-110, followed by the Ju-88, and in much smaller numbers, the Do-217 and He-219. In order to address the lack of a mass-produced specialized night fighter design, three new proposals were introduced. The first was the TA-154 Mosquito, a wooden dedicated night fighter design which hoped to capture the same success as the British aircraft which bore the same name. The second, the He-219, was already in limited service, but was both extremely expensive and not suited for any other uses beyond night fighting. Lastly, was the Ju-188, a bomber that at the time still lacked a night fighter variant. The TA-154, despite high hopes for the project, never came to fruition as a result of its troubled development. The He-219 was sidelined by Chief of Procurement and Supply Erhard Milch, who opposed increasing the number of specialized airframes in favor of mass production of multi-purpose designs. It thus remained in limited service. The Ju-188 design that likely would have received Milch's support simply never materialized. With the failure to find a new design, it was clear that the brunt of future night fighting would fall on existing models, in particular the Ju-88. In early 1943, it was on this design that hopes were placed for a high-performance, specialized night fighter that would become available to the Luftwaffe the following year. Variants of the Ju-88 were by then already mainstays of the Luftwaffe's night fighter force, but there was considerable room for improvement. The most common were the C-series fighters, which were little more than converted bombers, and the R, a high-speed model which made use of BMW 801 engines. The R was much faster, but its rudder stiffened at high speeds, and there were still drag-inducing features which are holdovers from the bombers these aircraft were derived from. By the end of 1943, work on the new night fighter was complete, and the Luftwaffe was preparing to receive the first planes by the start of the new year. The new Ju-88G1 would succeed the previous models, both consolidating production and vastly improving performance. Ju-88 V-58 was the primary prototype for the Ju-88G1 and first flew in June of 1943. It sat between the older Ju-88 R-series aircraft and the later Ju-88G in design and appearance, using the same basic airframe and its BMW 801 power plants. However, it also incorporated the vertical stabilizer designed for the Ju-188, used a new, narrower, low-drag cockpit glazing, and removed the bombardier's gondola, which carried a portion of the aircraft's armament in previous models. The armament was significantly improved with the addition of mid-fuselage gun pod which mounted four MG151/20 20mm cannons, making use of the space otherwise taken up by bombing gear, with another pair of cannons installed in the nose of the aircraft. However, the nose-mounted pair were removed later on due to issues regarding the muzzle flash of the guns affecting the pilot's vision, a resulting shift in the aircraft's center of gravity, and interference with nose-mounted radar aerials. After this series of changes to the aircraft's fuselage, armament, and the subsequent addition of an SN2C radar, the Ju-88G went into production. 6 pre-production and 13 production planes were completed by the end of 1943. The production switch between the older models to the G was smooth, with the first 3 aircraft being delivered to the Luftwaffe in January of 1944. Production and deliveries of the new model increased sharply over the following weeks, thanks to the aircraft sharing most of its components with older models. Mass production was carried out rapidly, with 12 planes completed a month later in January, roughly doubling the next month, and reaching a monthly production peak of 247 aircraft in June, before gradually falling as the production of its successor, the G6, began to supersede it. The Ju-88G1 went into production with an offensive armament of 4 forward-facing 20mm MG151/20 cannons in a pod mounted ventrally near the center of the aircraft. Upward-facing cannons in the fuselage, in a configuration referred to as Schräge were often installed later at field workshops. These upward-facing weapons were of particular use against British bombers, which, save for a few exceptions, had foregone ventral defensive guns. The aircraft was powered by the BMW 801G2, an engine considerably more powerful than the Jumo 211s on older models. This allowed the aircraft to reach 537 km per hour at an altitude of 6.2 km. The engines were unchanged from those of the previous Ju-88R model, though it was able to make better use of them thanks to the enlarged vertical stabilizer, which granted better control and stability at high speed. While it was not the fastest Nightfighter of its day, it possessed excellent flying characteristics, with pilots praising its well-balanced and smooth controls. Among its advocates were famed British test pilots Captain Eric Winkle Brown and Wing Commander Roland Bement, who both had the opportunity to fly the German Nightfighter after the war. To build on the success and production base of the first design, work began on the successor several weeks after it entered service. Retaining the same airframe, the G6 would be powered by the Junkers Jumo 213A1 and would standardize the use of equipment commonly added to the G1 at Luftwaffe workshops. To this end, several new prototypes were produced, these being the Ju-88 V108 and V109, which included the MW50 boost system, and Ju-88 V111, which served as a production prototype. The aircraft carried with it several key improvements over the initial model. It was faster, better armed, and possessed a more advanced set of electronic warfare equipment. The new standardized equipment included an upward-firing pair of 20mm cannons, the FUG-350 Naxos Z radar detector, and they would later be the first German Nightfighters to be equipped with the new SN2R and Naxos ZR tail warning equipment. Many of these were retrofitted to older Ju-88Gs as well, with the system quickly proving their worth. Ju-88Gs fared better in the presence of enemy night fighters than the HE-219 and PF-110s, which lacked standardized tail warning equipment to alert them to pursuing enemy fighters. Perhaps the most important feature of the Ju-88G, its SN2 radar, was easily the weakest point of the aircraft in comparison to its contemporaries in foreign service. Unlike the British or Americans, the Germans lacked any major production of centimeter band search radars, forcing them to rely on meter band types. In practical terms, the meter band radar carried with it several major disadvantages, the most evident and visible of which were the large aerial antennas which protruded from the aircraft's fuselage and created significant drag. In tests by the Luftwaffe's Rechlin test pilots, it was found that the Liechtenstein PC decreased the maximum speed of a Bf-110 by 39.9 km per hour. Another major disadvantage was its inferior ability to cut through ground clutter, leading to very poor performance at lower altitudes and making it useless near ground level. This was compensated somewhat by the addition of the Flensburg and Naxos passive detectors, but the lack of a widely produced centimeter band radar would plague the Luftwaffe for the remainder of the war. Field use of the aircraft began shortly after the delivery of the first pre-production aircraft, which were quickly sent out to units equipped with older models of Ju-88s. In this way, its introduction into service was gradual, with the first aircraft already being in the hands of more experienced pilots before more deliveries allowed for the entire unit to transition away from older models. Prior to July of 1944, Group 4 of NJG-3, Group 2 and 3 of NJG-6, and Group 1 of NJG-7 were supplied with large number of G1s, followed by a gradual supply to NJG-2, Group 4 of NJG-5, Group 3 of NJG-3, and NJG-100. It should also be noted that these aircraft could also be found in the inventories of most units, even those that did not fully transition over fully to their use. For the first 3 months of 1944, the Luftwaffe inventory had only a single-digit number of operational G1s, but by April and May, mass deliveries of the aircraft began, with 179 planes available in May and 419 by July. A total of 1,209 Ju-88 G0s and G1s were delivered to the Luftwaffe between December of 1943 and October of 1944, with the aircraft and its successor, the Ju-88 G6, becoming the mainstay of the German Nightfighter force for the remainder of the war. As a heavy radar-equipped Nightfighter, the Ju-88G would serve the Luftwaffe as Zahme Sau or tame boar interceptors. They differed from Wilde Sau or wild boar in that they were to receive guidance toward enemy bombers from a series of ground-based stations, with informations collected from various search radars and passive radio and radar detectors scattered throughout much of Western Europe. Ground control operators would direct interceptors towards bomber streams. For much of 1944, a typical mission for a Zahme Sau pilot would go as follows. First, they would take off and head for an assembly point marked by a radio and searchlight beacon. Then, they would wait their turn before receiving radio commands directing them towards a bomber stream. The fighters were led away from the beacons by their formation leaders, but rarely did all a group's fighters actually reach their target in close order. Lastly, upon reaching the stream, they would attempt to merge with it and then begin to search out targets with onboard sensors. In addition to direct guidance, ground control gave a running commentary on a bomber stream, describing its course and the altitude range the staggered bombers flew at. This running commentary was particularly useful later on when night fighters more commonly flew alone and the use of the signal beacons was restricted as they drew in RAF night fighters as well as German ones. The system remained extremely effective until a Ju-88G was captured on the night of July 12, 1944, after its rookie crew made a navigation error and landed at RAF Woodbridge in southern England. After carefully learning all they could about the aircraft and its systems, the British developed new radar countermeasures against the SN-2, which seriously restricted its capabilities. This, combined with their increased use of their Mosquito night fighters over much of Western Europe, would finally win them the night skies over Germany. By late autumn, RAF communication jamming would also later force the Luftwaffe to be more dependent on a less capable regional defense system for night fighter control, rather than the theater-wide methods they previously employed. In conjunction with their interception duties, many units equipped with Ju-88G would also conduct night ground attack operations against Allied forces in France in the Normandy beachhead and later across the Western Front in support of Operation Wacht am Rhein at the end of 1944. On August 2nd, 1944, the first of these operations were carried out against various targets, including the disembarkation area at Oran and the Normandy bridgehead. These attacks were conducted without the use of bombs and were regarded by some pilots as absurd due to the extreme danger in conducting low-level strafing runs at night and with only limited preparations being made before the operations. The attacks would be carried out until the night of the 10th, with the Nightfighters taking considerable but inconsistent losses. On the night of the 6th, one Ju-88G would claim an unusual victory in this period, as during their return flight, Lieutenant Jung of 6th NJG-2 and his radar operator Feldwebel Heidenreich detected and closed in on P-38 of the 370th Fighter Squadron at around 2:30 near Valdez, which they subsequently downed. On the night of December 17th, several night fighter squadrons would be called upon for night ground attack operations in support of Operation Wacht am Rhein. This action saw roughly 140 Ju-88s and Bf-110s of at least 7 Gruppen being committed to what was to become the Battle of the Bulge. These night raids did considerable damage and sowed confusion amongst rear echelon services as vehicles initially traveled with undimmed lights and many facilities failed to observe blackout conditions. These attacks were typically carried out by strafing and bombing in the case of modified aircraft, which were equipped with a pair of ETC-500 bomb racks. During the nightly ground attack operations during the Battle of the Bulge, these modified aircraft typically carried a pair of AP-250 or AP-500 cluster bombs, which themselves contain either SD-1 and SD-10 anti-personnel submunitions. German night fighters would account for the loss of dozens of vehicles and harass Allied positions after dark. While they did have some success, the missions were highly dangerous and seen as such by the pilots that flew them. While they succeeded in creating some chaos behind the front line, it came at the cost of many experienced night fighter crews, which by then were irreplaceable. Throughout its varied service, the Ju-88G would prove a valuable asset to the Luftwaffe's night fighter forces through its zenith in the spring of 1944 until its collapse nearly a year later. It excelled at both the interception and ground attack missions it was assigned and proved to be the most survivable German night fighter, thanks to its later standardized use of tail warning equipment. Beyond its performance, from a production standpoint, the aircraft was phenomenal. By making use of existing supply chains and components from earlier Ju-88 variants, it was able to rapidly pivot into mass production without issue. While the aircraft did have its downsides and could not resolve every problem the night fighter service faced, it effectively fulfilled its purpose and became the most numerous night fighter model in German service by the war's end.